Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. Thanks for tuning in today. I am going to be going through all of the books that I read in the month of March. So this is my March wrap up. It was a really good reading month for me. I read 11 books and the majority of them were 4 stars or higher. So they were excellent. And Lexi's crying because she wants to go outside. And so I will take my cat out on a walk after I finish filming this video. But yeah, lots of good books. Let's just get into it. Starting off with The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. This I finished reading in the first few days of March. This was a rollover from the Historathon that was happening in February. So this is a historical fiction, but it's a mystery. So it tied those two genres together. This is quite a popular book on BookTube. I gave it 3 stars. I thought it was okay / a fine book, but I thought it was way too long. And if it's a mystery, I kind of like the idea of being able to guess the ending or being able to come up with the conclusion or even, try to guess. But this is so weird and different that it doesn't even give you the ability to try to come up with the ending. Like there's no way that you can get there. This is a murder mystery, kind of like Clue, whodunit, set in a mansion in England, and there's a girl that died, and every single day the character gets to relive that day, eventually to potentially stop the death of this girl. The premise sounded interesting. I just didn't think it was executed as well as it could have been, and I found myself bored and not really compelled by the characters. So I wouldn't recommend picking this one up. But that's just my opinion. I know there's some people that love this book a lot and that is their favorite, and some people who think it's just okay, kind of like me. So yeah, that's kind of where I fell on this one. Secondly, I finished The Secret of Shadow Ranch by Carolyn Keene, which is the 5th book in the Nancy Drew series. I read this for the first Hey Readathon hosted by Chantel from An Intentional Life. I really wasn't able to complete the full readathon because it was only a few days, but one of the prompts was to read a book in a series and to read a book in a day. So I was able to do that with this one. I wasn't able to complete the other 2 prompts, but just continuing the Nancy Drew series, I started reading them last year. These Nancy Drew books are super quick listens, really easy and fun little books. This particular one was different because it wasn't set near her hometown and really didn't feature any of the main characters that are in the previous Nancy Drew books. This story just picks up in Phoenix and is set in the West. I thought it was a solid 3-star kids book. Good, nothing fantastic or amazing, because again, they're so short. Nothing really happens to really suck you in. Next up, I read Nickel Boys by Colson and Whitehead. This was also a bit of a rollover from February, where I read primarily books written by Black authors or books featuring Black stories. So I have this one checked out from the library and just thought I'd pick it up and finish it in March. The Nickel Boys is a historical fiction set in the 60s in Florida, right during Jim Crow, or right when Jim Crow ends during the civil rights era. It follows this Black teenage boy, has his eyes set on going to college, and everyone in the community likes him, and on his way to college, he ends up hitching a ride in the wrong car. The guy ends up being stopped by a cop, and he gets wrongfully kind of accused for stealing a car, and he gets sent to this reform school for boys. It was a little bit like Holes is the closest thing that I could relate to, where it's not quite juvie because the kids are still young for committing crimes, whether or not they committed those crimes or not. But he gets sent to the school, and it ends up being that the school has a lot of hidden stuff going on, and they obviously treat the Black boys there way worse than they do the white ones, and there's a lot of sketchy stuff going on, and all the people that are in charge of the school are mean, terrible people. And then it jumps back to present day with this character in New York living his life and the ramifications from his experiences going to that school. I had previously read The Underground Railroad by the same author, enjoyed it, gave it 3 stars several years ago. I felt similarly about this one, also gave it 3 stars. I thought it was a good, solid read. Enjoyed reading it, learned from it, because this book is based on a real reform school for boys that existed in Florida. So I thought it was good, but I wasn't necessarily compelled by the character, and there was a lot of thinking that happened in the book, but not a lot of action. It was just sort of a stream of thought kind of thing. There wasn't really many scenes that were actually happening. It was just this character either described something that happened or just described his thoughts and his opinion about what happened. And I don't know, I had a hard time kind of following that. There was one little twist at the end that was interesting and compelling, and I thought that was good. Solid read. I probably would still recommend it to people because it's an interesting one, but I just didn't love it. From there, I read a picture book, an adult picture book, more like a coffee table book, but it is The Portland Memories, The Early Years by the Oregonian. This was a book that my husband actually saw at one of his patients' homes. He's a physical therapist and visits people in their homes, and he saw this book and was like, wow, that's so cool. And she was like, why don't you take this home and read it for a day? It was this old lady. So he brought home this book, and I flipped through it because I actually don't know that much about Portland history, and I really liked this book. I actually gave it 5 stars. I thought it was a great coffee table book. I obviously borrowed it, but would totally have picked it up from the store and bought it and have had it on my coffee table. The book depicts Portland as it started as a city and all of the kind of buildings and history that happened throughout the early years of this city, like floods and fires and all the different kind of buildings and nuances of the city. So if you're all a Portlander or familiar with the city, highly recommend this one. It was really fun to flip through and look through old pictures and be like, whoa, that's the street that I walk on all the time or see. And seeing it like way back in like the 1800s and the early 1900s is really interesting. Solid coffee book that I would totally own. Then moving into kind of Women's History Month, I tried to prioritize books about women for the month of March, since it was Women's History Month, or prioritize books written by female authors. So the first one that has been on my radar for a very long time is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This I've seen both on BookTube, but also just personally from friends like on Instagram recommending this book, particularly the audiobook. And whenever someone's like, hey, here's a good memoir and it's even better as an audiobook, I'm like, yes, all about it, because I love the audiobook format. So this one was on my radar and I loved it. I read this book as a 5-star prediction for the Taylor Swift readathon as well, and it lived up to the expectations. This was an incredible story narrated by the author. This book follows Chanel Miller's side of the story from the Stanford sexual assault case, where she was a victim of Brock Turner, who had raped her, and it follows just everything that she went through from the night that it happened to the ramifications afterwards, both the emotional trauma, the physical trauma, and then all of the crap that she had to deal with during the trial, and truly being victimized by the public. Everyone should read it because she so like beautifully and even concisely and emotionally puts in words her experience that I can't even imagine going through that. So would highly recommend. This was an amazing book and definitely a favorite. So that was the first memoir. The next memoir I picked up for Women's History Month is The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. I think I mentioned this in a few other videos that this has been on my shelf for years and I've never picked it up, and I'm so glad that I did this month. This is one of the nonfiction books that I wanted to read in 2021, and I did. This is the diary entries of Anne Frank. She was a young Jewish girl in hiding in Amsterdam during World War II when Holland was occupied by the Germans, and she and her family and another family went into hiding in this like old warehouse in Amsterdam. And I wasn't totally familiar with her story, so reading this really kind of shined a light on what her experience was. But oh my goodness, as a 13 and 14-year-old girl, the way that she wrote these diary entries, her emotional intelligence, her way of writing, her way of processing super hard trauma and stuff that's going on in the world and in her life. This felt like it was written by a much more wise person, and it was just shocking to think that this young girl could write the way she did. And there's obviously still really cute stuff in here that I remember feeling when I was 13 about having a crush on a boy or whatever. But overall, it was incredible and sad and really good. I am so happy that I read this one. I gave this book 4 stars because obviously this is diary entries from a girl, and there was that stream of consciousness thing happening that I don't know if I fully love in books. So that's why I didn't push it all the way to 5 stars, but this is an amazing book and I would highly recommend for anyone to read it. And after that, I read another memoir, My Life in France by Julia Child. I listened to this book last week, and in my most recent reading vlog, you can see some of my thoughts on that. This book is about Julia Child and her time in France and how she fell in love with cooking and became a chef and did a lot for French cuisine and did a lot in the culinary field. And this book follows her 30, 40 plus years of falling in love with cooking, writing a cookbook, and her relationship with her husband and their friends, and traveling the world, being spontaneous, living life as if it's an adventure, which it is. So there was that joy and energy throughout the book, which I really appreciated, and I thought it was solid. I gave it 4 stars. It was a great audiobook. Up next, another nonfiction, 84 Charing Crossroad by Helene Hanff. This I originally saw on Literary Overflow's Instagram. She recommends this book quite a bit, and then I saw that Noelle Gallagher read it and enjoyed it, and I didn't really know anything about it except that it is about books and letters, and I thought, that could be interesting, and I know that it was short. And I'm so glad that I picked this up. Also, the audiobook, excellent. I gave this book 5 stars because it was so sweet and so wholesome and just so feel good. It follows an American woman living in New York who wrote a letter to a bookstore in London wanting to buy a certain book. And it's this American woman with a lot of spunk and character and comedy in her writing. The bookstore replied to her letter, and then it follows their correspondence throughout many, many years and all of the different people in that bookshop who would write to her and she would write to them and she would send them gifts. And it was just the sweetest thing ever. Like I said, 5 stars, loved it, would recommend, and it's literally only like a 2-hour audiobook, so very short. Next, I picked up Milkweed by Jerry Spinelli. This book I picked up because I needed to read a book recommended by a friend for both the Read Your Bookshelf Challenge and also for the Taylor Swift Readathon, and I was feeling a little bit like a reading slump was happening, so I wanted a short book. So I picked this one up. This was recommended by my friend Jessica. I believe she read this in school. I had never heard of it, and this is a middle grade, potentially young adult historical fiction set in Warsaw during World War II. This follows a young boy who is an orphan in the city, and he joins a group of orphan boys and they steal food to survive, and then the Nazis come and occupy the city, and then it's his life in the ghetto, and he befriends this girl and kind of becomes part of her family, and it was really good. I gave it 4 stars. I really like the writing. I think Jerry Spinelli did a really good job depicting the terrors of World War II and all of the intense stuff that happened, but from the perspective of a child who didn't really understand what was going on around him and how he was traumatized by what he saw or how he had to learn and adapt to his surroundings to try to survive. I thought it was great, really enjoyed it, would recommend as a middle grade young adult, obviously with very tough topics and stuff to deal with in here, but I really enjoyed it. It was good. The next book I finished is The Ride of a Lifetime, Lessons Learned from 15 Years as CEO of the Walt Disney Company by Robert Iger. I know this is about a man. It doesn't have to do with Women's History Month, but I picked it up because for Buzzwordathon, I needed a book with time in the title, and I was going to read A Secondhand Time by Svetlana Alexievich. That was like a 30-hour audiobook about Russian history, and I just couldn't do it. Couldn't do it. I knew I wasn't going to finish it, and I knew that I wouldn't want to pick it up. So randomly, this one is the only other book on my TBR with the word time in the title, and it did sound interesting. So I read it. This book is what it says it is. It follows Robert Iger's role in the Walt Disney Company as CEO and all of the decisions that he made and all of the acquisitions that he was a part of, like Pixar and Marvel and then Fox, and building the different resorts and all of the different kinds of people and characters that he had to deal with. And it also talked about a little bit of his past and working in the ABC company and some stuff that happened there. Overall, thought it was a solid business book. I rounded up to 4 stars. I think it was more like a 3.5 to me. It wasn't anything crazy, and I'm, not going to be a CEO of a company, so it wasn't necessarily relevant to me, but I was a business major and I did appreciate some stuff in this book, and I thought it was very interesting. I had previously watched the Pixar documentary with my husband about how Pixar was started and all the different people that were involved in that, and I thought this one was really interesting because it talked about his role in that Pixar Disney relationship and his relationship with Steve Jobs from Apple, and yeah, I thought it was cool. I like knowing about random stuff like that, so I liked it. And then finally, today, March 31st, I finished The Hunting Party by Lucy Foley. I had previously read The Guest List last year by Lucy Foley, and I liked it. I think I landed somewhere around 3.5 or 4 stars. It was a good thriller. The Guest List was. This one, not so much. Nope. Not a good thriller. I gave it 2 stars, and that was generous. I almost gave it 1 star, but I didn't want to be too brutal, so I gave it like 1.5, which rounded up to 2. Anyways, this book, it was an isolated mystery. So you follow this group of friends in this remote Scottish resort, and then there's an epic snowstorm that snows everyone in, and there's no service and no one can get in and no one can get out. Follows multiple perspectives, and it jumps from, hey, someone died, and then like 3 days ago, and you follow different characters that lead up to the point of the person dying. I like that setup. That's exactly what the previous book, The Guest List, was also set up that way, and I enjoyed that. And I enjoyed it here too, but I hated the story. Like, I really did not like these characters. One, super unrealistic characters, the way that they behaved and their thinking, and even what motivated them to think and do these certain things was just so not how humans are. It was dumb. No. And then it wasn't even enough that they were unrealistic, they were also all super stupid. They all had drinking problems, everyone just wanted to sleep with each other, and so there was just a lot of like weird sex stuff happening. And then thirdly, you could totally guess who the bad guy was. Like, the big twists in the book, so easily predictable, at least from my perspective, and I know that I wasn't the only one. I saw some other reviews about people being able to guess the ending. So this one just was not a good one. Would not recommend it as a thriller. It wasn't good. And I wish it came with a content warning. Like, I didn't need to pick it up. But again, I have a really hard time DNFing books, so I followed through and just finished it and regret it. It wasn't great. It wasn't worth it. End of the month on a not so great note, but that's okay because I am excited to pick up some good books in April. Pick up books that I love, that I want to read, that I'm excited about. I don't really have a TBR. I don't really have specific books that I need to read in the month or a theme that I'm following, which I feel like after February and March, which both had themes, I'm excited to just sort of mood read and pick up whatever I'm feeling. Spoiler though, I did finally start Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, and I'm really into it. So I'm glad I picked that one up. You'll hear my thoughts about it sooner or later. That's my wrap up. Those are all the books that I read, and I'm excited for the month ahead. That rhymed. I appreciate all of you for watching, and I will see you guys in another video soon. Bye!